Hey everyone. Hey everyone. Thank you so much for attending our legal metrics event today. I'm Larita, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the in-house committee at AABA. And sorry if you hear any construction noise during my intro. Apologies about that. So the idea for this event was actually born out of our Land's End Hike and Dim Sum event a few months ago. Susan, who is also a co-chair, was talking to Kathy during the hike and got to talking about ways legal can advocate more effectively. So I'm really excited to have Kathy here today, who will be sharing her learnings on how legal teams and lawyers can leverage metrics to be more influential, get promoted, get hired. So first, a little bit about Kathy. Kathy was an attorney, or is an attorney, she's still an attorney, and has spent over a decade practicing law. She started at the firm Wilson Sonsini and then went in-house at Medallia and DoorDash. At DoorDash, she saw the business grow exponentially, and metrics were always on top of her mind as she started as a commercial counsel and then grew into leading the commercial function. Now she is the CEO and GC of Streamline AI, which focuses on metrics for in-house legal teams. So I'm super excited about hearing all the tips and tricks she has. Especially for me, I work at a tech company and metrics are the name of the game. And it's been very tricky and challenging to figure out how do lawyers use the right metrics and use them well. So without ado, I'll kick it over to Kathy. And during this webinar, please feel free to ask any questions you have in the comments in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lo. And also thank you so much to AABA, IHC, and also, to both you and Susan for, helping me brainstorm this event and allowing me to be here to speak to the wonderful audience. So as Lo shared, I spent years as in-house counsel, and one of the biggest challenges I had was really related to effectively tracking and reporting on metrics. In fact, when I was at DoorDash, I actually asked my entire team to track all of their work on a spreadsheet, all the work that they were working on and all the meetings that they had, which of course is less than ideal. My poor team, but they were great sports and they all went along with it because we all knew the importance of being able to really show up with numbers, especially supporting a business that was growing so fast where we had to advocate for sufficient headcount just to keep up with the rate of growth. So I desperately wanted a system that could actually automate all of this so I wouldn't have to just manually spend so much time, right? And also we all left law firm life, so we wouldn't have to keep manually tracking all of our work. So I couldn't find a system in the market that addressed all these pain points. That's what led me to build Streamline with a Google product leader and AI expert. So just very quickly about Streamline, I'm going to turn it over to the substance of what we're here to talk about. Streamline is supporting companies like Grammarly, Logitech, 8x8, demand-based, so lots of fast-growing high-tech businesses, as well as in regulated industries, trusted by over 500 attorneys. So we've grown a lot through the years. And today, I'm excited to be sharing best practices with all of you on the benefits of tracking metrics. Like, one, it's absolutely possible for legal teams to track metrics, and also how to do that, first at a department level, and then I'm going to drill into how to do that on an individual level. So success for me at the end of the session looks like all of you feeling excited about this, understanding the importance of doing it, having some ideas on how to get started, which is super important. And then at the end of this presentation, I'm going to share an ebook with all of you that has way more details that you can then use to really implement this as part of your ongoing work. So let's get started. First and foremost, let's unpack the why now behind legal teams measuring and analyzing our performance with metrics. Because historically, this wasn't really a thing. And there's just been a very clear shift in how legal teams are now being held accountable, right? And I've really noticed that over the past 4 to 5 years, as compared to when I first started practicing, that there's so much more focus and need for leaders to show up in this way, also for individuals to show up in this way. So I've noticed in particular that Chief Legal Officer is a title that has gained a lot more popularity, right, in recent years. And just think about that title as, sort of the pinnacle leader for the entire legal function, right? You've got chief in the name. And what that's signaling is this is an executive role within the whole company. It's not just a department level role. And so at an executive role, you need to really focus on running that entire department as a core business function. We don't just get an exemption to think about us differently. So my expectation as a CEO is if I hire a CLO for my company, I'm expecting that person to show up and be able to converse very similarly to any other C-suite role in the business, right? So that's just one example. I think that's signaling like the evolution of legal much more towards, becoming another business function. And in addition to that, a lot of the market instability that we've seen over the past few years with companies going through rifts, companies overhiring, when capital was a lot cheaper, all of that has led to legal departments being increasingly expected to justify headcount and resources. And frankly, budgets getting slashed, legal being treated even more so than before as a cost center. All of that is forcing us to really have to actually show up and put numbers behind what we do, right? Now, all that being said, it's not all doom and gloom, because through the course of building Streamline, I've talked to hundreds at this point of GCs and CLOs, and there are lots of people out there who feel very much, not as affected by these changes. And these are individuals, and there's absolutely a pattern here. These are individuals that have invested in years of building really strong relationships with their business partners, in particular with the CFO. And as a result, the other business functions understand and clearly see the value of the legal function. So people who are able to do that, they actually have teams that are well resourced. There is a lower instance of burnout. Legal team, overall are happier. So there's so many benefits, right, to doing that. Where I've seen legal departments struggling is in the absence of that strong leadership, where, maybe you have newer heads of legal, newer leaders who just feel like I need to put my head down. I need to just do the work. Whatever is being thrown at me, I'm just going to handle it. But not as focused on building a brand within the entire function, within the entire business, right? And so that may have worked before. It's just not as effective now. So picture says 1,000 words. I really think that this is sometimes like how we feel when we have to justify our value. But the good news is all of this is possible. And it's really important to do it, not just with anecdotes, but actually with cold, hard numbers. So before we get further into it, I would just love to know for all of you, what is your primary goal? Like, why are you here? Why are you on this webinar? What is your primary goal in tracking metrics? So Ezra will be sharing a link to the poll for all of you in the comments. So if you will just click into that and take just a couple of seconds and select the one that makes the most sense. That is really helpful data for me. If we have time at the very end of this webinar, what I'm going to do is also take a look at the results that came in and then read them out, because it tells an interesting story, right? Why people think that this is super important at this time for themselves. Okay. So hopefully that's enough time for you to get in there and put your answers in. And I'm going to flip to the next slide. Okay, so now let's take a quick look at multiple different ways that KPIs can be leveraged within a legal team. So hopefully the word KPI didn't just cause you to have some heartburn or break out in hives. I know that's a very alien word, I think, often to legal teams, right? They're like, how do KPIs even, even apply to legal? So a lot of legal teams, I think, do spend time being highly reactive to business needs and feeling very much like KPIs belong to other business functions. But actually, what's much more effective is deciding upfront what is the most important to the legal function so that you can actually prioritize. And you may not be able to get to everything, but as long as you can align it to these different, overall high-level objectives, that gives you a much stronger stance to go back to say, okay, this is how we're focusing. This is the framework. These are our KPIs. So at this stage, it's all about making decisions around what is the North Star to the entire legal department, right? And to be effective, we really should, at the very outset, maybe on a quarterly basis, decide what are going to be our North Stars as a legal team, right? And supporting, enabling, and accelerating revenue really should be always one of those North Stars, if not at the very top, right? So when you are able to really trace the work that you do so that you understand the story and the connection to that top line, to the revenue, then you're super clear on how your work ultimately enables your company to grow and to succeed. And then your work becomes 10 times more impactful to the CFO and to the CEO. And the GC should always be able to show up and be able to tell that story really succinctly with numbers. So again, it's really worthwhile taking some time and actually meeting as a team and really thinking about what are our North Stars. So as an example, because I was responsible for commercial legal and also legal operations at DoorDash, and I was at a company at the time where growth was our absolute number one focus, part of the KPI that I tracked was how much volume is my team handling? How much are we supporting on a quarterly basis? And I could actually see how that number was growing exponentially. That number was my most important number, because if I didn't have a handle around it and I didn't have a clear sense of the ratio of how that number connected to our response rates, to the staffing I needed on the team, then I would not actually be able to scale my department in a way that could effectively meet the business needs. So success story I want to share with all of you, purely by tracking this one KPI actually enabled me to get 4 additional headcount that was out of scope within a quarter, right? Finance had budgeted, finance didn't give me any incremental headcount. I had the volume numbers to show up and actually go on a roadshow. So I met with each of the sales leaders that I was supporting. And I said, look at how much the volume is growing. I gave a percentage. And I said, if I don't get an incremental head from your team, this is how it would impact our response times. So they actually donated a sales headcount. I know it's not always possible to do that, but they did that and it completely transformed our experience. So a huge part of our job is actually marketing. That's how I saw what I did with the sales team there. That was advocacy and marketing, right? Telling them, how we're actually supporting their teams and the impact that we're driving. So here are some examples on the slide of KPIs that really enable you to align with business objectives. So these are the dimensions to think about, right? What are the impact on revenue generation? What work? We just talked about that. And I have some more examples to walk through on the next slide around that. 2 is, highlighting legal's role in financial growth. So showcasing instances where legal initiatives directly drove maybe expansions to new markets, maybe launching new products, a number of different ways that you can think about, the second one. And then the third are compliance initiatives that actually support business outcomes. So really important to not just talk about, we did so much work, to enable HIPAA compliance, or we did so much work to become GDPR compliant. But what did that mean? Were you able to support an expansion into a new market, launch a new suite of products successfully, avoid, fines and litigation? So connecting that, probably more so the first 2, right? Connecting that really to achieving business outcomes. Also what I wanted to share is when you think about setting KPIs or metrics, use this basic framework to identify whether or not the KPI is actually effective. First, does the KPI actually tell you the health of your department, how your department is actually performing, how it's doing? Or 2, does it show you which areas you need to focus on to improve? Because ultimately, KPIs are not just about having numbers to have numbers. It's enabling you to be actionable, to understand what it is that you need to actually improve, right? Or how you're doing. So hold on a sec. Let me just make sure I covered everything I wanted to cover here. Okay. All right. So now let's talk and double click a little bit more on how numbers can really help you tell a story and impact how legal shows up as a revenue enabler. I think this is super important because we often get, I think, wrongly branded as a blocker or slowing down the business when it actually couldn't be further from the truth, right? So if you look at the example on this slide and just take a quick look at these numbers, these are all numbers that actually we can get out of the box from Streamline, but you can track these yourselves around how long something spends, okay, at each different stage of the legal process. And unfortunately, what business teams, if left to their own devices, what they're looking at is purely how long it spends from start to finish, because they think that legal is responsible for that entire journey when that's actually not true. So if you drill into the details, okay, first of all, from a high level, it looks like, oh my gosh, like, sure, things are slow, right? It's on average taking 21 days to handle a request. So if that's your business team and that's what they think, then of course you're going to think that legal is slowing things down, right? It's taking like almost a month to get anything through legal. But when you peel back the layers, you can actually see that, oh my gosh, on average, legal actually handled their part in less than a week. It spent 11 days on average stuck in waiting on. And what does that mean? Waiting on means waiting on other teams to handle their piece, right? So hopefully the screen is large enough for you to see, it drills down into approvers taking a long time, review of changes by the counterparty, feedback, even the signature process, all of that contributed. And that wasn't just legal holding things up. So that is one of the reasons why it's so important to capture granular metrics that are detailed enough for you to actually pinpoint where the true bottlenecks are. And then you can actually have really great KPIs around bringing down this time that it spends in review, right? Because you have control over that. Or if you're able to pinpoint where the major bottlenecks are and unblock some of those, then you can even have a story around how you brought that down. So you can actually start getting really precise with the changes that you're making. We also tracked not just the overall volume of work coming in, but we also tracked the type of work coming in, because how long you spend working on an NDA should be completely different from how long you spend working on a third-party contract, right? And extrapolating that even further, of course. So I was always of the mind that if a certain piece of work wasn't going to enable my team to get promoted or for that work to really feel meaningful from a professional development standpoint, how do we automate that work so it becomes, as fast and low lift as possible, and hopefully make it go away entirely. And in some instances, if that's not possible and you still have to do it, I actually thought about really low cost ways for me to offshore that work. And I brought, examples of that to the table for approval. For example, offshoring the work by understanding the volume, extrapolating that to the cost of the business and how much cost I was able to save by offshoring the work versus handling it in-house, right? Using salaries and just the cost of that in-house resource. So that's how, again, you can build business cases using metrics. Okay, now let's zoom out a little bit and think about what actually makes a good KPI for legal teams. The really important thing to do at the outset is look at what are the overarching goals that we want to achieve. And what I'm bringing to you is, one of these goals you should think about is how the legal team is being perceived by the rest of the business and what you want to do there, right? So maybe the business teams view legal currently as a blocker, and you want to transform that perception to becoming legal as a revenue enabler. So that is going to set you down a certain path where you track certain metrics to be able to tell that story, right? It's all about understanding what is the overall story you want to tell. Maybe you have a very different goal. Maybe the function of the legal department, the most impact you could make for this particular company is to create and protect as much IP as possible. Maybe that's what this company is all about. Then that's going to take you down a different path, right? Around what you're going to be measuring and what you're going to be tracking. So first you need to understand that overarching goal. And then also it's really important in setting that high level goal to map to really big, maybe the biggest company level goals. So maybe your company wants to be able to go public within a year, right? If that's the case, then a lot of what legal needs to do is actually working with finance, maybe, and being able to support, the entire process of becoming a publicly reporting company and shoring up its policies and procedures, putting the right safeguards in place, maybe even hiring, right? So that you can actually have people with expertise, whatever it is. Those are different sets of goals. From, maybe the company actually wants to get acquired within a year. That will set you down a completely different path. So high level goals, and then making sure that whatever it is that you set in terms of KPIs are really clear and measurable. That's the important thing, is it has to be quantifiable down to a number, and not just high level, aspirational. It has to be time bound. I really recommend quarterly goals, because that allows you to have an increment that's long enough for you to actually do things to make an impact and drive change, right? Monthly goals, very difficult to do anything within a month. And then annual goals are just too long. So now, especially, having my role as the CEO, everything is measured according to quarters here, which is probably the case for most businesses. So again, legal needs to align itself to the business, right? To the business functions. And assignable. So every single KPI should be assigned so that you have an overall owner and driver. And then you can have other people, of course, that waterfalls into different responsibilities and different roles. But you should have one person that's ultimately responsible for each KPI. And then the final one should be realistic. You don't want to overshoot and make it, so grandiose that everybody feels demotivated, but you shouldn't sandbag either too hard, because then what's the point? Then you're not actually stretching yourselves and really shooting for something that's meaningful for the whole team. Continued here, a couple more actionable, right? Again, we kind of broke that down earlier around, does it tell you something meaningful? Does it help you to drive change? And then finally, less is more. You don't want to come out with like 10 different KPIs. It's just impossible for your team to manage. Find 2 or 3 key areas, and you can always iterate and add more or refine in the following quarter. So to give you one example, one of our customers made one of their KPIs actually tracking waiting on time. So we talked about that in the previous slide, right? How long something is stuck on a team outside of legal, and they really got focused on tracking that time to understand what's truly causing lags in completing deals, and then trying to winnow that down as much as possible. And then having a story around how legal is a champion for driving revenue efficiency, revenue enablement, right? By speeding up time to close. Don't underestimate that even very simple types of metrics like volume, like urgency, can actually be super impactful. It doesn't need to be super, super complicated. In fact, if it's super complicated, you probably won't do it. So if you just start by measuring like something so simple as how many requests do we get and how urgent are they? Maybe like when you get each request, assign what engineers do, which is a P0, P1, P2, P3, and then understand what each of those mean, right? If you're getting a request that's a P0, to many people that I know that have implemented this, a P0 means dropping everything else you have, everything, so that you can focus on this P0, has a lot of impact on all the other work you're doing. So if you start tracking the number of P0 requests you are getting personally and also, your team, then you can actually start understanding, oh my gosh, is something happening here that we actually need to get ahead of? So for example, within a given quarter, if 70% of your work comes in as P0s, something's going on, right? It's pretty much like nothing is a priority if everything's a priority. And so you need to start having some hard conversations and sitting down with business leaders and telling them that they probably need to work on having their team prioritize better, because it's not meaningful coming to legal with P0s. One of our customers, City Block Health, which is a 1,000 person health tech company. They have a 14-person legal department, just to give you a sense of their size. They implemented Streamline to enable them to move from what the GC and the legal team calls a high access model to a high prioritization model. And this transformed the experience of the legal department. It actually freed up 20% of additional capacity for the legal team. Think about what that means if you're able to wake up one day and you have 20% of additional capacity on your legal team. Like it's pretty incredible. And what the high access model meant was that the team previously was just reacting to everything the business was throwing at them. Like whatever someone shows up with, we just handle it. And then if we can't handle it, we move it to outside counsel, which of course you can imagine that would drive up the cost significantly of outside counsel spend. So they instead moved to a high prioritization model, which meant if you show up and you tell legal it's P0, then you need to actually get certain approvals in order to truly justify this being a P0. So I drop all of my other work, right? That just enabled true high prioritization matters to get the attention they deserve. And then everybody else understands, right, that you can't just get to everything. So the answer isn't working, 24 hours a day, not having lunch. By the way, a lot of legal teams do feel like that, and they're totally burning out as a result. The answer isn't working longer hours, right? It's actually measuring and understanding and then communicating back what's possible. Also, by the way, your business leaders are doing that. The other functions are all prioritizing. When I ask my team to just take on new things, the first thing they say is, okay, Kathy, that's fine, but what are we going to drop, right? What are the real priorities that you want us to have? So we can do the same for the legal team as well. Okay, so we talked about a lot of conceptual things and some details, but now let's drill more into some examples of metrics that you can be tracking. I always like to advocate that if you're tracking metrics for the first time as a legal department, start looking at commercial legal. Simply just because the commercial legal work lends itself very, very nicely to tracking KPIs. It's high volume, a lot of it's repeatable. There are discrete things coming in with different stages. So you can look, and I've talked about this already, at just the volume overall, and then also by contract type, right? This can also help you figure out the most effective way to assign matters to your team. So some teams do round robins, but actually maybe from looking at the metrics, you realize round robins isn't actually the most effective way. So what I developed for my team at DoorDash was team-specific support model. So I mapped each commercial counsel on my team to a different function, right? Different sales function. And then they developed relationships and they developed expertise. And that also was driven by numbers as well. So that's just one example of the volume metrics. The other is time metrics, right? We gave some examples already of that, where looking at time to close isn't super helpful. What I like to do is time to first response for commercial legal, because often when you just get back to the business and you're able to tell them high level, like, hey, I've got it. I took a quick look through. These are the top issues. And maybe this is how long it's going to take. Like that just drives or gives the business person a great deal of comfort and transparency. And they feel like, okay, legal's got it. I don't have to worry anymore. So I really measured how long it took to get to that first response. You can also look at how long does it take typically for something to get approved, right, by another team. You can look at how many turns does something take to complete. So this one actually is really a helpful metric to track. For most legal teams, we already have a sense that if we're able to start on our own paper versus third-party paper, it's going to go so much faster. Now, when I was at a SaaS company, and we would constantly be telling the sales team that it's going to be faster, it's going to be faster, it always fell on deaf ears because we had no numbers around it. So if you just show up with like general recommendations or, you show up with stories, deaf ears, right? It's always going to fall on deaf ears. Once we started measuring this as a team, And we showed up and we said to the sales leaders, did you know on average, if you start on third-party paper, it takes 52 days to close. If you start on our own paper, it's going to take less than a week. Guess what? Complete change in behavior almost overnight, right? Sales team's like, oh my gosh, this is huge. 52 days, like it's never going to come in by the end of the quarter. I'm not going to get my commission. So, it became so much more impactful. That's just one example of a time-based metric, right, associated with terms that you could make. And then the final bucket that's very impactful are exceptions. So several of our customers track this. They call it threshold exceptions. And that is, we all have like certain policies, right, where we can accept certain terms and we can't accept certain terms. However, we're all aware that we make exceptions to these policies all the time, but we don't track them necessarily. So let's just say, as an example, you have a policy against giving termination for convenience, right, which is very standard for SaaS contracts. You don't want termination for convenience. Well, if at the end of the quarter, you're able to tally it all up and you realize that you gave an exception on this 20% of the time, or maybe like for 30 deals, you had termination for convenience. Not just that, but half of those deals were tiny. All of a sudden, now you have something very concrete to bring back to the head of sales and also to the CFO, right? It's very possible that the CFO is probably aware of this already. If not, there is an issue. But that's how you actually show up as like the CFO's best friend. And you're able to sit down and have a very meaningful conversation with your head of sales to drive some real changes. Okay. So another set of examples, the extraordinary projects is probably one of my favorite examples to track because I've had this question over the years countless times. People are like, okay, we know that commercial legal lends itself really well to tracking metrics, but what about everything else, Kathy? Right? What about for product, legal, and privacy, regulatory, litigation? How do we go about tracking meaningful metrics? And I would say start with looking at above and beyond work that you have done for the business. Keep a running tally of projects that are either outside the normal scope of your work, you just happen to stretch and handle this additional thing, or you went above and beyond in some way and achieved some incredible outcome for the business, right? Some examples of that would be, maybe you closed a massively complicated deal in a way that really set a new, either like really exceeded the quota for that quarter, or somehow was just massively impactful for the business, or maybe you settled a piece of litigation, or maybe made something go away, right? That otherwise would have turned into something very costly. Whatever it is, I'm sure actually if I asked you and sat you down right now, you can probably come up with a number of these different things that you've done in the past quarter. The sad thing is lawyers don't tend to keep a running tally of the work, and we don't tend to put a dollar amount next to it. So I know this is going to be hard, but you absolutely can estimate and quantify and just do your best at putting a number around it. And the reason is if you show up at the end of a quarter, right, or at the end of the year, and even from like a performance review basis, if you're able to just tell your manager really succinctly, here are 6 examples, and that is how much it impacted the top line or the bottom line of the business. We were able to get, $30 million of business, right? Or we saved $10 million of cost, all because of me. That enables your manager to advocate for you way more effectively. And also, if everybody on the team did it, then as a legal team, you can show up with an amazing story around what you did. And the reason why, you should just feel comfortable running an estimate, because I know as lawyers, we want to be super precise, right? We want to get it down to the right penny or dollar or whatever. It's because every single other team is estimating. Every single other team. Sales forecasts are all about estimations. The CFO is doing estimates all the time, right? All these different accounting rules and all of that. It's to help actually create consistency and reliability around estimates. So as lawyers, we should really, really feel comfortable doing the same.
Something that I do is I borrow if I support a project. So I'm on privacy. If I support a project and they're using a metric saying that they've reduced their headcount or not headcount, their spend, their cost by X%, I just borrow that from my metric. So that's also an easy way to do it.
Definitely. That's a really great idea. Yep. Sometimes people have done the legwork for us already, and we should not feel shy in that situation. Okay. All right. So this is the last poll. I'm just curious to find out what tools your team may currently be using to track legal metrics. When we've run this in the past, most teams are not using a dedicated tool to track metrics. They're trying to do it in a spreadsheet, but most people are like not really doing it at all. So I'm curious for this audience, there'll be a link again in the chat that you can click on and select the most relevant one. This isn't a select as many as possible, but just select the most relevant one. And then I'll take a look at the very end of the presentation. But I'm very curious to hear what you are all currently doing. Give you a second there. So we've got spreadsheets, we've got ticketing software, we've got contract management tools, custom internal tools. If your team has built something, I had the benefit of having someone on my legal team that also was a software engineer. So he actually coded a way for us to track metrics, which I think is super impressive, but not a lot of teams have access to that. And then intake and matter management tools like Streamline that are built for legal teams, or you currently don't do anything, or something else. Okay, let's keep moving. So we're almost at the end now, just a couple more slides. Let's talk about how to get started. So now that you have some ideas, hopefully you're getting excited. You're like, this is really important. I want to get started. How do you do this? Well, one of the things that I've learned as a founder is the importance of going from 0 to 1 quickly. So please do not spend too much time designing a perfect system that's going to take you forever to actually launch. Just start, don't overcomplicate things, right? So that can be as easy as getting a piece of paper and just starting to log things. Better still, I recommend, getting started with a spreadsheet. I think that's a lot better because you can actually run calculations off of that much more easily versus a sheet of paper that you could probably also misplace and lose. The other most important thing is consistency. So it's not something that you just do, in a couple of days and then forget about, but really make a habit of it. So when I did this with my team at DoorDash, we absolutely became super consistent. The team was in that every single day, many times a day, logging the work. And they actually, they knew the benefit, and that ultimately it allowed us to tell a really tremendous story. Whenever we met as a legal team and during, performance cycles. So they were motivated to do it. So that's the other really important thing is don't just track it to track it. Really make a habit of actually using it as often as you can. I've seen teams run things called weather reports where they actually share out, key metrics of their department on a monthly or quarterly basis. And it's really amazing for the whole team, actually, when that happens, because they feel like their work is being seen. They feel like what they do really matters. So you can adopt a version of that. Or, what I did was every single time we met as a legal team, like all hands, and each of the leaders would talk about what we did. I made sure never just to be anecdotal about it and always come with numbers and, what changed, what improved. And that was a huge moment for the whole team, right? We all felt like, we were part of something that was really cool and special. Do it in conversations with other business leaders, do it in your resumes, like put it in, talk about it in interviews, like truly make this a habit. Otherwise, what's the point? What's the point of spending time doing all this work? And then eventually, you'll get to a point where after you've been tracking for a while and you're doing this manually, you're going to find it really time consuming. Things are probably going to get missed. So that's when you may start looking at an actual dedicated system to automate all of this. It's under this category of matter management and intake. So I'm very happy to talk to you about it if you think that your team is at a point where you are excited to explore that. My LinkedIn is in that Chiron under the screen there. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to set aside time. Lots of case studies I can bring, and we can make a case together to advocate for a tool like this with a CFO. I do think a lot of legal teams sometimes hesitate asking for budget to fund software, and ultimately now in the seat of the CEO or even having a CFO hat on, because I'm in charge of finance as well now, which is interesting. I will always, every single minute, entertain an ask to spend money if it's going to save me more money or make me more money, right? So don't be penny wise and pound foolish. Actually, really think about the best investment that you could be making for your company. So final thing is, before we wrap here and I take questions if you have any, scan the QR code here and download a copy of our free ebook, which is Metrics That Matter. Lots of people have benefited from this. We have lots of detailed examples in here, even more examples of different metrics that you could be tracking, and how you can be really making a case, to promote the legal team within the entire business. So let's see if we have any questions. I don't see any yet. But otherwise, I hope that this was informative and helpful for everybody.
Yeah, that was so great. I mean, it just reminds me personally of how I can be more creative on how to share my story, whatever the scenario is, whether that's to my manager or even just kind of partnering with my business stakeholders of if you're having that conversation with them and they're asking you to prioritize something and you don't have the time, then it can just kick off a conversation of okay, what is the business value for you? And then you can kind of pull or prompt them to start kind of sharing more of those metrics or ways that you can also measure your impact if you take on that work. So I know I could do better with that. So this is all super helpful for me. I hope everyone else on the call on how you can kind of take these learnings. Oh, we have a question. Awesome. Well, I will ask the question. So when you are interviewing people, what stats tend to jump out to you?
Great. That's a great question. It depends on what role I'm interviewing for, or the kind of role that I'm hiring. If I'm hiring someone from a legal function, I think any metrics in there would immediately jump out at me because it's just not something that you see very often, right? So Susan, as soon as I see that in a lawyer's resume, that immediately tells me this person has business awareness, understands what business people care about. It's telling me that they probably would have an easier time building relationships with business people, having an easier time advocating for different priorities, right? That the legal team cares about, because they're able to voice it in a way that the business teams understand and can contextualize. So any numbers, but particularly revenue numbers. What this person did to unlock revenue, what this person did to help the business grow. And I would say that's probably true even of other business roles that I'm hiring for as well.
That's super helpful. I see another question. How would you recommend that a leader of a team, motivate their team to start logging metrics if they don't think they'll get additional headcount anytime soon? So why do this extra work when we may not see the payoff anytime soon?
Well, I think the first thing is, you may think that that's the case, right? Based on certain, headcount freezes and, certain level, company-wide things that have happened, but you never know. And so I would always leave room for that that healthy level of doubt, because if you can really come to the table and justify, hey, I can help the business actually move faster, grow faster, get more revenue if you just invested in this headcount, and quantify the ROI like that, you never know what would happen. I think the other side to that is, and this is something I personally saw, right, with the team that I ran, it's really fulfilling for people to feel like their work matters and it's seen. And they're not just, grinding away and pushing paper. No one wants to feel like that's their life, right? So if you're able to capture enough metrics to help you and the whole team understand and contextualize, like, oh, look, in a given quarter, this is what we're able to accomplish, right? We helped the company close X dollars. We helped the company launch this many products, which led to this many dollars, whatever it is. All of a sudden, there's just a different feeling to that work. So I looked at it as actually a way to motivate and engage my team.
Yeah. And one thought I had is also maybe you could start smaller in one area and also kind of get the team to get excited about, okay, even if it doesn't result in additional headcount, maybe it's really great for their performance review, for their raise or bonus, things like that. So
yeah, that's really
question.
Oh, I was going to say one more thing though, which is improving the brand that legal has within the business as well, right? I did a webinar actually recently on burnout, and how burnout is a massive issue that's really systemically affecting our whole profession. And burnout isn't just amount of time you spend working. I've been happier working longer hours at certain jobs and completely demotivated and feeling burnt out working less hours at other jobs. A lot of it is actually a sense of, how am I being seen by the rest of the business? Do people hate the legal function? Do they actually view us as partners? Like, all of this really, really matters. So you can totally make a change there by tracking metrics.
That's true. You could put it in a blog to the company to showcase all the cool work that legal does too.
Yeah.
Another question. So do you know how often legal may get pushed back, maybe from the executive team, business partners, on whether those metrics that legal is sharing is actually accurate? Like, do you get that pressure testing?
I never have, honestly. And I've never really heard of examples where that's happened. Yeah, that being said, of course, all of our customers have access to the dashboards in Streamline. So it's automatically backed up, right? Because it's a system around it. It's not just like a pen and paper. But I've honestly never heard even people being like asking questions around why, even if you're manually tracking it. Yeah.
Everyone's too busy.
Yeah. And also, I think there's just a base level of understanding that, like, if you put in the work, you're not going to just come out and lie about something. You know what I mean? Like, you've clearly, done the work to get there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
So
any other questions?
That's a really good question. Yeah. Do not let that be what stops you from getting started.
Mm-hmm. I think that might be all the questions that we're going to get.
All right. Well, this
Thanks,
is great.
Everyone.
Yeah, I'm glad we fit it into an hour. Hope it was fun. And thank you so much again, Lo, for, being here and asking great questions and making this happen.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Hope everyone had a really helpful time, and hope to see you at the next one.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Hope to hear from you. Okay, bye.